Tibet is a region on the Tibetan Plateau in eastern Asia. It is the traditional homeland of the Tibetan people as well as some other ethnic groups such as Monpa, Qiang and Loba peoples, and is now also inhabited by considerable numbers of Han Chinese and Hui people. Tibet is the highest region on Earth, with an average elevation of 4,900 meters. The highest elevation in Tibet is Mount Everest, Earth's highest mountain, rising 8,848 meters above sea level. The Tibetan Empire emerged in the 7th century, but with the fall of the empire the region soon divided into a variety of territories. The bulk of western and central Tibet was often at least nominally unified under a series of Tibetan governments in Lhasa, Shagatsi, or nearby locations. These governments were at various times under Mongol and Chinese overlordship. The eastern regions of Kham and Amda often maintained a more decentralized indigenous political structure, being divided among a number of small principalities and tribal groups, while also often falling more directly under Chinese rule. After the Battle of Chamda, most of this area was eventually incorporated into the Chinese provinces of Sichuan and Qinghai. The current borders of Tibet were generally established in the 18th century. Following the Xinhai Revolution against the Qing dynasty in 1912, Qing soldiers were disarmed and escorted out of Tibet area. The region subsequently declared its independence in 1913 without recognition by the subsequent Chinese Republican government. Later, Lhasa took control of the western part of Zhejiang, China. The region maintained its autonomy until 1951 when, following the Battle of Chamda, Tibet became incorporated into the People's Republic of China, and the previous Tibetan government was abolished in 1959 after a failed uprising. Today, China governs western and central Tibet as the Tibet Autonomous Region, while the eastern areas are now mostly ethnic autonomous prefectures within Sichuan, Qinghai and other neighboring provinces. There are tensions regarding Tibet's political status and dissident groups that are active in exile. It is also said that Tibetan activists in Tibet have been arrested or tortured. The economy of Tibet is dominated by subsistence agriculture, though tourism has become a growing industry in recent decades. The dominant religion in Tibet is Tibetan Buddhism. In addition, there is Bon, which is similar to Tibetan Buddhism, and there are also Tibetan Muslims and Christian minorities. Tibetan Buddhism is a primary influence on the art, music, and festivals of the region. Tibetan architecture reflects Chinese and Indian influences. Staple foods in Tibet are roasted barley, jack meat, and butter tea. Names. The Tibetan name for their land, Bot, means Tibet, or Tibetan Plateau, although it originally meant the central region around Lhasa, now known in Tibetan as U. The standard Tibetan pronunciation of Bot, Po, is transcribed Bho in Tornadri phonetic transcription, Bo in the THL simplified phonetic transcription, and Poi in Tibetan pinyin. Some scholars believe the first written reference to Bot, Tibet, was the ancient Bautai people recorded in the Egyptian Greek works Periplus of the Erythraean Sea and Geographia, itself from the Sanskrit form Bharata of the Indian geographical tradition. The modern standard Chinese exonym for the ethnic Tibetan region is Zhang, which derives by metonymy from the Sang region around Shagatsi plus the addition of a Chinese suffix, Qu, which means area, district, region, ward. Tibetan people, language, and culture, regardless of where they are from, are referred to as Zhang, although the geographical term Zhang is often limited to the Tibet Autonomous Region. The term Zhang was coined during the Qing dynasty in the reign of the Jiaqing Emperor through the addition of a prefix meaning West Zhang. The best-known medieval Chinese name for Tibet is Chubo. This name first appears in Chinese characters as in the 7th century and as in the 10th century. In the Middle Chinese spoken during that period, as reconstructed by William H. Baxter was pronounced Thux Ph. John and was pronounced Thux P. John. Other pre-modern Chinese names for Tibet include Wu Xiguo, Wu Shizang, Tubot, and Tanguta. American Tibetologist Elliot Sperling has argued in favor of a recent tendency by some authors writing in Chinese to revive the term Tubot for modern use in place of Xizang, on the grounds that Tubot more clearly includes the entire Tibetan plateau rather than simply the Tibet Autonomous Region. The English word Tibet or Tibet dates back to the 18th century. Historical linguists generally agree that Tibet names in European languages are loanwords from Semitic Ibat or Tubet, itself deriving from Turkic Tabat, literally, the heights. Language. Linguists generally classify the Tibetan language as a Tibeto-Burman language of the Sino-Tibetan language family, although the boundaries between Tibetan and certain other Himalayan languages can be unclear. According to Matthew Kapstein, from the perspective of historical linguistics, Tibetan most closely resembles Burmese among the major languages of Asia. Grouping these two together with other apparently related languages spoken in the Himalayan lands, as well as in the highlands of Southeast Asia and the Sino-Tibetan frontier regions, linguists have generally concluded that there exists a Tibeto-Burman family of languages. More controversial is the theory that the Tibeto-Burman family is itself part of a larger language family, called Sino-Tibetan, and that through it Tibetan and Burmese are distant cousins of Chinese. The language has numerous regional dialects which are generally not mutually intelligible. It is employed throughout the Tibetan Plateau and Bhutan and is also spoken in parts of Nepal and northern India, such as Sikkim. In general, the dialects of central Tibet, Kham, Amda and some smaller nearby areas are considered Tibetan dialects. Other forms, particularly Dzongkha, Sikkimese, Sherpa, and Ladakhi, are considered by their speakers, largely for political reasons, to be separate languages. However, if the latter group of Tibetan-type languages are included in the calculation, then Greater Tibetan is spoken by approximately 6 million people across the Tibetan Plateau. Tibetan is also spoken by approximately 150,000 exile speakers who have fled from modern-day Tibet to India and other countries. Although spoken Tibetan varies according to the region, the written language, based on classical Tibetan, is consistent throughout. This is probably due to the long-standing influence of the Tibetan Empire, whose rule embraced the present Tibetan linguistic area, which runs from northern Pakistan in the west to Yunnan and Sichuan in the east, and from north of Qinghai Lake south as far as Bhutan. The Tibetan language has its own script which it shares with Ladakhi and Dzongkha, and which is derived from the ancient Indian Brahma script. Starting in 2001, the local deaf sign languages of Tibet were standardized, and Tibetan Sign Language is now being promoted across the country.